must have some knowledge of some things that happened. And I've been saying people must come out and contact the commission and assist the commission. There must be a lot of senior officials in government departments. There must be people in the National Assembly, in the NCOP, who know things that fall within the terms of reference of this commission. They are not coming forward. We ask them to come forward, but I just need everybody to know that just because we have been inviting them to come forward doesn't mean that if they don't come forward, this commission will not get to know what some of them know. The commission will investigate, and there will be people who appreciate the importance of this commission and its importance to the nation and the country, who will come forward and tell the commission what they know. And in the process, who will be honest and tell us about what other colleagues of theirs know, which they are not coming forward to say. And this commission will do its work. And I just hope that people will realize that it will be better if they come forward on their own and come and assist the commission rather than be dragged, screaming and kicking, to come and give evidence to the commission. This is a very serious issue in our country. The whole nation wants to know what happened, who knew what, who did what. And if public representatives especially are going to withhold information and we find out, this commission will do what it has to do. So a time is going to come when we will find out by ourselves what people did, what they knew, but are not coming forward to assist the commission. We appreciate all of those who are coming forward to assist the commission, including Minister Nene, being the first minister sitting minister to appear before the commission to give evidence. We appreciate that very much. He will give evidence, and at some stage, if I grant permission, he may be cross-examined. And at the end of everything, I will make findings about his evidence and other people's evidence. But for now, I just want to say we appreciate, Minister, your coming forward to assist the commission. I know that at least I think is one or so minister that will also be coming. There may be some former ministers. I just hope that more people who know what happened or who have information come forward on their own and assist the commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In that regard, Minister Nene, as I say, the further allegations that have surfaced in the last day or so. In that regard, once the Commission has had an opportunity either to receive or obtain evidence and investigate that evidence, I trust that you would be willing to come to the Commission and deal with those.
Indeed, I will be available.
Thank you. Minister, you are currently the Minister of Finance, and as the statement says in paragraph 2, you were appointed as such on 27 February 2018 by the current President. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Would you please briefly tell the Chair of your background and qualifications?
Thank you. I will just go through it as reflected in the statement so that I do not veer off. I have over 20 years of experience in the finance industry, and I have an advanced diploma in economic policy from the University of Western Cape, a certificate in economics and public finance from the University of South Africa, BCom honors in economics from the University of Western Cape, a certificate in microeconomic theories and applications and macroeconomic principles and issues from the University of London. I'm extensively involved in the finance sector and have acquired vast knowledge on how it operates and how it is regulated. My further qualifications and expertise and positions that I have held appear on my curriculum vitae.
And is it correct, Minister Nene, that on the 8th of November 2008, you were appointed as the Deputy Minister of Finance under the leadership of the then President Nhlanhla?
That is correct, sir.
Until when did you serve in that position?
I served in that position until the elections in May 2009. I may not have the exact date. I think
May 2014, perhaps?
no, there were elections in 2009.
Not 2009.
Yeah, so I served just between November and the elections in May 2009. And I was then appointed again as Deputy Minister in May 2009.
Right. When you were first appointed as Deputy Minister of Finance, who was the Minister of Finance?
It was Minister Trevor Manuel.
And did you serve as Deputy Finance Minister under the leadership of former President Jacob Zuma?
That is correct. From May 2009, the President was...
Until?
I served as Deputy Minister until May 2014 as Deputy Minister.
Right. And who was the Minister of Finance during that period?
The Minister of Finance then was Mr. Pravin Gordhan.
Just to get the time periods correct, President Zuma assumed office in May 2009.
That is correct.
And Minister Gordhan was appointed as Minister of Finance also in May 2009.
That is correct.
And he served in this portfolio until 25 May 2014.
Correct.
He was reappointed on 13 December 2015, and we'll hear more about that in due course.
Yes.
And then served until 31 March 2017.
That's correct.
You served as the Minister of Finance, I understand, from the 25th of May 2014.
That's correct.
Until what date did you serve in that office?
Until the 9th of December 2015.
Now, do you have any belief in regard to the reasons for your removal from office on 9 December 2015?
Indeed, I do believe that I was removed from office because of my refusal to toe the line in relation to certain projects. And in hindsight, and having also heard from the former Deputy Minister's saga, it seems that those projects may have benefited the Gupta family and other close associates of the then President. I will, if allowed to, describe some of these examples for instance, the nuclear deal and the SAA strategy, because these issues, like other procurement processes within government and state-owned companies, were subject of intense scrutiny by the National Treasury.
Minister, when you say the Gupta family may have benefited, could you be a bit more specific?
As I said, in hindsight, because as I said, this I base on the former Deputy Minister's situation who was offered my position because of my refusal to toe the line with regards to the nuclear deal in particular. So it is apparent from that saga that they stood to benefit in whatever form.
And we're talking about financial benefit.
I would imagine so, yes.
In order to understand the context of your evidence, Minister, and particularly its significance for the terms of reference of the Commission, would you assist the Commission by describing the role and functions of the Minister of Finance, and particularly the role that Treasury as an institution plays within our constitution, democracy?
Thank you for the question, and if you indulge me, I have just a few paragraphs that describes this. To start with, the Minister of Finance works under pressure, particularly when it comes to approving decisions that would have implications for the fiscus. Sometimes the Minister of Finance is referred to as Mr. No. If we had a female one, she would also be a Miss No. When government departments are advised that their proposals must fall within the cabinet-approved medium-term policy, strategic and fiscal framework, and or comply with governance requirements as agreed policies. It is an unfortunate appellation because the role of the Minister of Finance is to be scrupulous in managing fiscal sustainability and the finances of the country in order to ensure economic growth and the sound and transparent management of the public finances. Ultimately, this is critical for the delivery of services to the public to transform our people's lives and to comply with socio-economic obligations for which the government is responsible under the Constitution. Now, because almost everything that government does has implications for fiscal policy, National Treasury participates or is consulted on all government policy proposals and proposed major projects. Guided by the need to safeguard long-term fiscal sustainability and economic interests of the country, National Treasury takes a critical view of these policy or project proposals. However, irrespective of the Treasury's initial position, once Cabinet has deliberated and decided on the policy or project, it is Treasury's role and responsibility to find the funds for such a policy or project, taking into account the approved fiscal framework and the long-term fiscal sustainability and economic interests of the country. It is therefore important for me to try and explain the role of Treasury in government so that the significance of the attacks on National Treasury are understood. The structure of the fiscal and public finance system of our country is set out in Chapter 13 of the Constitution of 1996. Chapter 13 deals with the National Revenue Fund, the division of revenue between national and provincial and local governments, the establishment of the Treasury, procurement, borrowing, Treasury norms and standards. Many of these provisions are then given effect in the Public Finance Management Act and the Municipal Finance Management Act and the annual budget legislation. Now, the key finance institutions established in the Constitution are the National Treasury, the Central Bank, which is the South African Reserve Bank in South Africa, and the Financial and Fiscal Commission. Although the Reserve Bank is required to perform its primary function independently, the Constitution requires regular consultation between the bank and the Minister of Finance. The Treasury is required to ensure expenditure control in each sphere of government by ensuring compliance with legislated measures that regulate expenditure. The Treasury is empowered by the Constitution to stop the transfer of funds to any organ of state if it has committed a serious breach of those measures. The head of the Treasury is the Minister of Finance. The Minister bears unique obligations in law. He is responsible for tax policy and is the executive authority for the South African Revenue Service to oversee the collection of tax revenue and the management of the National Revenue Fund. Only the Minister of Finance can introduce a money bill, which is either a tax or spending bill, in the National Assembly or the Division of Revenue Bill. Hence, only the Minister of Finance can introduce the tax and spending proposals in Parliament as part of the budget. It is also only the Minister of Finance who can introduce a bill before the National Assembly that determines the equitable division of revenue raised and each province's equitable share of that revenue, which is called the Division of Revenue Bill. Draft legislation that amends the budget, which would be tax, appropriation, and division of revenue bills, may only be introduced in the National Assembly by the Minister of Finance. A loan by the national government may only be concluded by the Minister of Finance on behalf of government and only for the following purposes: to finance national budget deficits, to refinance maturing debt or a loan paid before the redemption date, to obtain foreign currency, to maintain credit balances on a bank account of the National Revenue Fund, to regulate internal monetary conditions should the necessity arise, or any other purpose approved by the National Assembly by special resolution. Similar to loans are guarantees, indemnities, and other securities which bind the national government to a future financial commitment. Before guarantees, indemnities, or other securities that bind the national government to a future financial commitment may be issued, the concurrence of the Minister of Finance must be sought and obtained. Conditions may be attached. The Chief Procurement Officer also falls within the ambit of the political responsibilities of the Minister of Finance. Public sector procurement must be undertaken in a manner that is fair, equitable, transparent, and cost-effective. The Chief Procurement Officer is responsible for permitting deviations and exemptions under circumscribed conditions. The effect of this is that the Minister of Finance has weighty responsibilities and often has to make unpopular decisions, taking into account the long-term fiscal sustainability and economic interests of the country. It is this office that drives the budget process, approves loans and guarantees, oversees compliance with financial management and procurement processes, and is the final bulwark against corrupt dealings that jeopardize public finances. This is why the optimal relationship for any Minister of Finance to have the full support of the President at all times. The complexity of the position of Minister of Finance is more fully explained in a document prepared by former Minister Trevor Manuel as a handover memorandum when he left the office in 2009, and that document is attached as NN1. It is part of the thicker document which we referred to as K1A.
Thank you.
It's in the bundle, Chair. It's a lengthy document, Minister Nene. You've obviously had opportunity to look at the document. Do you agree with its contents?
Absolutely, though it is now a bit dated because it does refer to some of the institutions that no longer exist, but it provides for very, very useful and instructive context.
Would you continue then, please?
It therefore makes sense that those who wish to pursue a systematic strategy to raid the public coffers, or those who are intent on taking decisions that have the potential to undermine fiscal sustainability, would attack the role or credibility of National Treasury as a means of getting access to government funding allocations and guarantees, or obtain permission for exceptions or deviations to conceal dubious and irregular procurement.
Let's
this is
deal
evident.
With one of the attacks then on Treasury that you referred to earlier, and that is the Project Spiderweb.
Correct. Indeed, this is evidence in that sinister document titled Project Spiderweb. That is also in the thicker document it's titled NN2.
Let's just go there briefly if we can, Minister. It's at page 291 of Exhibit K1A.
Did you say 291?
291.
Okay.
Annexure NN2. You have it there, Minister?
Correct.
Is that the document you're referring to?
It is the document.
Would you very briefly just describe what this document is and, in your view, what it attempts to achieve?
This document suddenly surfaced in July 2015, styled as an intelligence report, which suggested that Treasury had been captured by the apartheid-era intelligence operatives as well as white monopoly capital in order to control the country's finances. The document came to my attention on or just after 20 July 2015. It was forwarded to me by email from Anthony Julius, who himself was mentioned in the document.
What post did he occupy?
He is the Deputy Director General in Assets and Liabilities. The origin of the document and how it ended up in Treasury is still unknown to me. It was circulated to a lot of us, but it was the original one didn't come to me. I got it from the secondary source. When I read this document, it reminded me of a remark, if I were to say, that was made by former President Zuma about a month earlier, where he told me that there are apartheid agents within the Treasury. I recall conveying this remark to the Director General at the time, Mr. Fuzile. I dismissed this as conspiracy theory. However, it was clear to me that the Treasury did not enjoy the support of the President.
Before you continue with your statement, may I ask you, Minister Nene, do you know of any investigation in relation to the origins of this report?
Yes, because after getting this report, I requested the Director General to inform the relevant authorities to investigate the matter.
We'll deal in more detail with those issues in due course, where you deal in more detail with the report.
With the report, yes.
But just at this stage, do you know whether there was indeed an official investigation pursuant to that request? And if so, whether there have been any fruits in a report of any sort?
We never got any feedback from the relevant authorities. All I know was that it was given to the head of, who was in our state security, and we then expected that we would be favored with the outcome of the investigation. We never got any.
My apologies, Minister, I've taken you out of the sequence of your statement.
Yeah, absolutely.
You were...
He was at paragraph 22, I think.
24, I was at paragraph...
20?
Paragraph 24.
Oh, okay.
Yes. That the comment that I referred to in paragraph 23 was made by former President Zuma at a meeting that he had called me around mid-2015. As I said, about a month before this surfaced. I recall that it was in the afternoon when my PA, Ms. Marumo, came into a meeting at our small boardroom in Pretoria to give me a note whilst I was having a meeting with the Director General, Lungisa Fuzile, and other senior managers of the Treasury, where she left me a note which the Director General also had sight of as he was sitting right next to me, which read, "The President would like to see you." I scribbled a response on the note saying that I would do so as soon as I finished the meeting. My PA returned a few minutes later with another note saying that I needed to go now. I left the meeting immediately, murmuring to the DG that maybe I was going to be fired if you are summoned in such haste. On arrival, I found President Zuma with a senior Malaysian official from Engen or Petronas, the company that owned Engen then, whom I did not know, but was introduced as an official from Petronas. The President explained that South Africa needed to own a refinery and that Petronas was prepared to sell its refinery to Petro SA. Further, and most importantly, he stated that Petro SA would need a guarantee to be able to raise the funds, and as Minister of Finance, I would have to approve the guarantee. I then indicated that I was not aware of the transaction, but if I received the application from the entity via the relevant department, I would consider a guarantee subject to the normal evaluation process. It was at that point that President Zuma, in the presence of the Malaysian official who's connected to Petro SA, raised the issue of spies within the Treasury. This was about a month before the document Spiderweb surfaced. I briefed Mr. Fuzile on President Zuma's request and a possible application that might come to Treasury for him to consider through the normal processes. Now, the Spiderweb document mentioned names of several officials of the National Treasury, including Deputy Minister Mr. Mcebisi Jonas. Officials Mr. Lungisa Fuzile, Mr. Kenneth Brown, Mr. Andrew Donaldson, Ms. Avril Holstead, Mr. Anthony Julius, Mr. Ishmael Mamoniat, and employees of state-owned companies, including Mr. Daniel Majila, Chief Executive of the Public Investment Corporation. The key objectives of the Project Spiderweb were alleged to be, as you will see on the document, because it's not addressed to anyone, but it is titled National Treasury and the Project Spiderweb. Now, these were the allegations that it was alleged, the objectives were alleged to be to influence the design and implementation of the economic and fiscal policy. It was alleged that it will influence the appointment of key leaders in the Reserve Bank, Treasury, DTI, and SOEs that fall under their ministries, to manage the outcomes of these institutions, defend the position of the Spiderweb through media, and attack and prosecute critics of Spiderweb, Project Spiderweb, through SARS and other means.
Were allegations made in relation to you in Project Spiderweb?
Indeed. The main allegations made in relation to me were that I'm being handled by Ms. Maria Ramos, whom the document code names as the Queen of Leaves. That during the recent World Economic Forum in Cape Town, I had assembled all the DDGs and chief directors from the Treasury at a Cape Town hotel for a brief meeting, and the outcomes of the meeting were that Mr. Lungisa Fuzile, that's the first one.
Before you go on, I'm sorry, Minister
Yes.
Nene, would you just tell the Commission who Ms. Maria Ramos is and what position she occupied at the time the Project Spiderweb document was released? She's
Group Chief Executive, I think that's the correct title, at Absa Bank. I think Barclays at that time because of the association, but
Thank
she
you.
worked for the bank. Well, these are now the outcomes of the meeting. The outcomes of the meeting, of the alleged meeting, was that Mr. Lungisa Fuzile, the then Director General for Treasury, will not be extending his contract at the end of August 2015, that he will be joining the Faculty of Economics at the University of Stellenbosch, and his departure would be a catalyst for some big changes inside Treasury.
Did that occur, in fact, or did it not occur?
It did not. But also that Ms. Avril Holstead will be promoted to the position of DG at Treasury, that she will be promoted to position of DDG very soon as a stepping stone for her to become the next DG. That also didn't happen. That Mr. Michael Sachs, the then DDG, will be transferred to one of the SOEs, and that Mr. Tumi Moleke will be transferred to another ministry as a DDG that works with the Treasury.
Did those two events occur?
They also didn't. That I stated that the Treasury must play a key role in the management of state-owned entities and expect my officials to play a firm hand in managing the affairs of the SOEs. A number of changes will be happening at the SOEs. One of the key actions of Treasury is to facilitate the participation of private sector in the SOEs. It was also alleged that I stated that the Government Technical Advisory Center, our GTEC, will be given a huge task of identifying private sector companies to partner with our state-owned companies, or SOEs. It was alleged also that I stated that the board of SAA must be terminated by September 2015, and I indicated that Ms. Maria Ramos was helping me to identify the new board members for the board of SAA. That the former CEO of Kulula.com had been identified as a replacement for Mr. Nico Bezerinote at SAA, and GTEC will be given the task of identifying a strategic equity partner for SAA. It was also alleged that I stated that Treasury must support the appointment of Mr. Brian Malife, and that Eskom will be creating a position of COO, and that Mr. Matsela Koko will be filling in that position. It was alleged further that Treasury is very close to sell the government stake in Vodacom, and Eskom will be getting some cash injection. It also alleged that Ms. Maria Ramos was also invited by the minister to give a word of support to the staff of at Treasury, who then praised the staff for the wonderful work they are doing. And she is alleged to have stated that she will be assisting Minister Nene to identify skills for the key positions at the Treasury. That she has already assisted in placing the key Chief Investment Officer at the GEPF, and she'll be assisting in identifying the CEO at GTEC, which is our technical advisory, since Andrew Donaldson will be the chairman.
Just to put these allegations in their context,
yes.
The allegations that you have just recited to the chair are all allegations made in the document.
Correct.
Spiderweb.
Correct.
And what is your observation about the correctness of these allegations?
I strongly deny each and every one of the allegations as baseless and have no merit.
Before we move on in your statement, the allegations appear to be quite detailed. They appear at one level at least to exhibit some knowledge, detailed knowledge of the workings of the Treasury and detail individuals in their positions within Treasury and detail functions of Treasury. Do you have any idea of where this information or this disinformation, as you put it, could have come from?
It is not clear because, some of it actually didn't entirely make sense, because if you talk about where people were, the people that were going to be moving from what department to what department. But indeed, it showed somebody who had actually studied a bit of National Treasury.
Yes. And given the import of all these allegations and the level of knowledge purported to be held by the author or authors of the document, what was your expectation of the need for a proper investigation?
Well, we wanted to establish the origins of the document so that we could then establish what the intent of the document was.
You detail that a little later on.
Correct, yes. But also
I'm sorry.
Yes.
What concern was raised in your mind on reading this document?
Indeed, I was concerned that the Treasury was, it seemed like the Treasury was now going to be targeted in an attempt to undermine its legitimate role and function. And it's for that reason that we also issued a statement on the 26th of August, 2015, condemning the project Spiderweb dossier. And the statement, if you allow me, I will just go through quickly on what the statement said.
Oh, I'm sorry. Before you read the statement, Minister, may I just ask with regard to paragraph 31.5, that's one of the objectives of the document that you have articulated as one of the objectives that were alleged of the document. It says the key objectives of Project Spiderweb were alleged to be 31.5, attack and prosecute critics of Project Spiderweb through SARS and other means. Did you understand at that time what that objective meant, and if you didn't understand then, is there anything that has happened which may have made you to understand what that may have meant or not?
Indeed, I did not at that time, but as I outlined them here in the report, I take them directly from the document itself on page 293, that those were the objectives, 292 up to 293. But indeed, judging by the developments at the revenue services today, on hindsight, indeed, there is a link between this document.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Pretorius.
You would bear with me a minute. Yes. Perhaps in relation to that allegation in the paragraph you've just referred to, are you able to specify any link in relation to the more general theme that you have stated in your statement about attacks on Treasury and the integrity of the institution and events at SARS, at the Revenue Services? Do you have any further explanation of that link?
Look, it is public knowledge that we had a situation at SARS where the institution actually started moving in a direction that sought to undermine its strength. And as we have seen that there were people through SARS or within SARS that ended up having to be either removed, or the institutions that were disbanded within SARS that were actually responsible for holding together the revenue services.
Those issues are in the public domain at
Absolutely.
present.
Yes.
Minister, you were about to read to the Chair the media statement that you issued following the release of the Project Spiderweb dossier.
Yes. The statement read as follows. National Treasury has become aware of a document called Spiderweb that has been circulated in the media and would like to condemn it in the strongest terms. The faceless people behind it allege a conspiracy to influence economic policy and the work of the National Treasury. The document is baseless and vexatious. It appears calculated to sow seeds of suspicion and may be motivated by an unexplainable desire to undermine and destabilize the institution. The contents neither warrant a response nor further comment. The Treasury has passed it on to relevant authorities to investigate its source and will be transparent about the outcome of that process once completed. And as indicated in my statement and in response to your question earlier, Chair, I tasked the Director General, Mr. Lungisa Fuzile, to forward the report to the relevant authorities for further investigation regarding the genesis of the dossier. I understand that Mr. Fuzile sent it to Minister Mahlobo and Dr. Batando Siswana.
Before you go on, what positions or offices did they occupy at the time?
Mr. Mahlobo was the Minister responsible for State Security, and Dr. Batando Siswana was the head of that department. Mr. Fuzile indicated that they visited him twice to ask for their access to the email system of the people who received the document and those who were named. I have never received any follow-up report on whether an investigation was actually initiated by the relevant authorities or the outcome of any investigation.
From your point of view, having testified as to the importance of Treasury as an institution and the vulnerability that Treasury has to attacks and the consequences of that, was this a satisfactory outcome for you?
It was not. We were concerned, but we felt that we do need to focus our attention to making sure that now that we know that the Treasury is under attack, we focus our attention on being vigilant and do our work going forward.
Would you then move on to a new topic please, Minister, and that's to deal with your meeting with Deputy Minister Jonas.
Indeed. My meeting with Minister Jonas, I must preface it by that that's the first time that I heard that I may be removed from office when I met with him on the morning of Monday, the 26th of October 2015. I have read his statement, which is dated the 8th of August 2018, which was submitted to this commission. And I confirm paragraphs 31, 33, 39, 41, 41 up to 43 of the statement.
When you say you confirm those paragraphs, do you mean that you confirm the correctness of those paragraphs?
The correctness of the paragraphs, yes.
Would you go on, please?
I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius. You might be planning to deal with it at a later stage, but it would be convenient to refresh our memory as to what those paragraphs in Mr. Jonas' statement say, which he is confirming.
Am I correct, Minister Nene, that your recollection of what is contained in those paragraphs and your recollection of the exchanges between yourself and Deputy Minister Jonas is contained in the following paragraphs from 37 onwards?
Correct.
Okay, so we don't need to go and look. Okay.
Yes.
We may. I'll just check that there's nothing we leave out.
Okay, all
Thank
right.
you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yes, would you deal with
Okay.
the exchange? Is that paragraph 37 of your statement,
yes.
please?
Minister Jonas telephoned me on Friday, the 23rd of October 2015, in the afternoon. I had earlier left a meeting at NEDLAC, a NEDLAC meeting at NEDLAC House in Rosebank. I got the impression that he was indeed agitated, from the tone of his voice. He told me that there was an urgent matter that he wanted to share with me. At that time, I was on my way to OR Tambo International Airport to catch a flight to KwaZulu-Natal. We agreed to meet on Sunday, the 25th of October, when I returned to Joburg. However, on Sunday, the 25th of October 2015, I arrived in Gauteng later than planned. I then called Mr. Jonas and requested that we postpone our meeting to Monday morning. We indeed met on Monday morning, the 26th of October 2015, at around 8:15 in the morning. We were supposed to meet in my office, but we decided to go to his office as he had a good balcony, which would be outside and perhaps which we also thought would be safer. I could see that he was flustered. He informed me of an uncomfortable meeting he had had with Mr. Ajay Gupta, Mr. Fana Hlongwane, and Mr. Duduzane Zuma in Saxonwold.
Before you proceed, Minister, we might as well be frank about it. When you say it had a good balcony, which would be safer, would you be a bit more specific, please?
Well, in the environment where Project Spiderweb and all of those things, you would actually, even when you look at a flower pot, you're not too sure whether it has something. So you think perhaps the balcony outside might be a safe place to discuss a matter of confidentiality.
Thank you.
He then told me that during that meeting, he was offered the position that I was holding at the time, that of Minister of Finance. He also told me that Mr. Ajay Gupta offered him 600,000 rands in cash immediately, and a further 600 million rands to be deposited in a bank account offshore. Mr. Jonas told me that he rejected the offer of the deposit and cash that he was invited to take immediately. At that stage, there were already rumors circulating in the media about an imminent cabinet reshuffle. My name was amongst the ministers who were reported to be due for removal. I had paid these rumors no regard. Mr. Jonas then informed me that the Guptas were aware of this intended reshuffle and that they had informed him that they were influential in the removal of certain ministers from their positions. And I recall saying to him, "Who are they to offer you the job of minister?" I suggested to him that I should resign perhaps, since I was to be fired anyway. But Mr. Jonas pointed out, and I agreed with him, that I should continue to hold the line at the Treasury and not give in to these threats. I was already concerned about attacks on the Treasury and the intentions of those behind Project Spiderweb dossier that had been released a few months earlier.
Before you continue, please, Minister Nene, apart from issues that were at that time in the public domain, you've given direct evidence about the Project Spiderweb dossier, which you've described in the context of attacks and potential attacks on Treasury, and you've given evidence directly about what Mr. Jonas reported to you in the context of rumors about your own removal. Did you not think to raise this with the President?
Certainly not. I always say that, our appointments and our removals are just it's an announcement. So you are in the job for 24 hours, actually, not for 5 years, as is always made out, because you serve at the pleasure of the President.
Right, you give some explanation for your subsequent conduct in paragraph 43.
Indeed. I say that although I was perturbed by what Mr. Jonas had conveyed to me, and even though I at some point thought maybe I should resign, but I immediately returned to the business of the day. I had a very busy day on that Monday with many meetings scheduled, including a meeting with the Executive Director and alternate Executive Director of the World Bank. That is now according to my diary for the day. A preparatory meeting with, on SAA and a briefing on ESCOM and independent power producers. I did not wish to be distracted from the tasks I had to perform. We were working under tremendous pressure at National Treasury, and amidst the particular challenges of the nuclear procurement program, the troubles with SAA and ESCOM, the economy underperforming, and we were required to consider where we could reduce expenditure as government. So we had just presented the medium-term budget policy statement 5 days before, on the 20th of October 2015, which is followed by many investor and public briefings which I was required to attend. This is usually a very busy period in the Treasury schedule, as it requires the Minister's full attention.
Minister, may I return to the question once more? In evidence that has been given before this Commission, and certainly in our own investigations, it appears, as appears from your own evidence today, that there were a number of direct and indirect, explained and unexplained attacks on important institutions in the country, particularly Treasury. But what is noteworthy, and perhaps this should be subject to further investigation, is that there appears to have been a silence insofar as there was any accountability to the public in regard to these events. Do you agree with that observation? And if so, do you have any explanation for it?
Maybe I don't understand the question well.
The Project Spiderweb dossier,
Yes.
the attack, in inverted commas, in relation to Mr. Jonas being informed that he might be offered by a completely outside third party a ministerial position. Why wasn't more said about this at the time in the public?
I think from our side, the only time we went public was when on Project Spiderweb, because we issued a statement because we were concerned. And also, that document was not only circulating within the Treasury, it also was circulating outside because we were beginning to get questions about it. So we did issue a statement just to dispel whatever it is, so that if there is anything else, people know that as the National Treasury, we remain focused on what we are supposed to do rather than...
And within the ruling party and within cabinet or other state institutions, were the issues relating to the Jonas matter raised?
Not at that time that I could remember.
Do you have any explanation for that?
I really wouldn't. I think at times we take some of those things for granted and think, you know, for instance, if there is an attack on the Treasury, Treasury deals with its matters, and you know, without necessarily elevating the matter to a platform that begins to look at what is happening in government and the country in general.
But what had transpired, according to Mr. Jonas' version, when he was at a meeting with, according to him, Mr. Jacob Zuma and Mr. Nhlanhla, at that stage, the time that Mr. Pretorius is referring to, at that stage, was it public knowledge, or was it known within government or generally?
It was not public knowledge, but as I understand it in Minister Jonas's statement, he then went on a little later to report the matter also to the relevant authorities.
Thank you.
You then go on in your statement at paragraph 44, Minister, to deal with your own contact with members of the Gupta family.
Indeed. In my own contact with the Guptas, I did meet the Gupta family, particularly Mr. Ajay Gupta, at a number of occasions, government events. They were regular attendees at government events at that time, but not to discuss government business, because that's generally what normally comes up. But the first time I met...
Before you go on, Minister, what type of government events were these? Can you recall?
I think the first one actually spells out what this one was. It was after is a dinner that takes place after the State of the Nation address. That was my first encounter in 2009. And I was Deputy Minister of Finance at that time. But then later invited, well, there would also be other functions, which I cannot remember properly. But I was later invited to the Sahara Computers offices in Midrand, and they marketed themselves as good corporate citizens that employ a number of young people in the technology space, but the key point that Mr. Ajay used to make is that they don't do any business with government, and they are, as I say, good corporate citizens, pay their taxes, and indicated that they were in the computer and mining industry, and he had also served himself. Had served on the President's Investment International Marketing Council, and he was an economist also by qualification and an advisor to the President. He then invited me to tea at his house to discuss the economy because of his understanding.
Before you go on, Minister, perhaps, Chair, this is an appropriate time for the short adjournment.
Yes, thank you. We'll take the short adjournment and we will resume at 11:30. All right. We adjourn.